Today we discuss art with Zoe Charlton. Zoe is an amazing artist who I've known for many years, and when you hear about her work and when you see what she's doing, I think she'll become one of your favorite artists too. Please enjoy another episode of the Bees and Honey podcast. What I love about Anchor is that it's given me creative control of my own material. I was approached by a big company to do a podcast about the art world, and I didn't want to sign over all rights to them. Anchor has allowed me to make this podcast and to keep creative control as well as financial control in terms of advertising. Anchor gives you everything you need in one place for free. You can use it on your phone or your computer. There are tools that help you to upload your recordings that you've done separately or on the app. They'll distribute it for you as well, which again, I couldn't wrap my mind around distribution, and they have it all there for you in one place: Spotify, Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, and many more. You can easily make money from it as well. They help you advertise. As you can see right now, I'm getting my first ad out through Anchor. And all you have to do is download the app or go to anchor.fm to get started. Good luck with your podcast and getting your voice out there and owning your content. Good morning, Zoe.
Good morning. How are you doing, Nico?
Good. Is this early for you in the studio, or are you normally at your studio super early in the morning?
Actually, it's not early. Depending on where I'm going, it might actually be earlier. So when I'm working in my studio in DC, I typically leave Baltimore about 5:30, 6 o'clock, so I can get in around 7. And if I'm working out of Baltimore, I'm here by 6 o'clock easily. So it's not early.
Right, that's good to know. So you have two studios, one in DC and one in Baltimore.
Yeah, I had to get a studio in Baltimore last year while I was on leave. I spent about a year away from my job, which was great. But instead of spending that time driving back and forth to a studio, I found a space not too far from where I live, just so that I could work without,
Yes.
spending, 2.5 hours a day on the road.
Right. And tell us what your work is again. What do you do outside of the studio practice?
Okay, so I am faculty at American University in the studio art program. I've been there for actually 16 years.
Wow.
Yeah,
Wow.
so I know, isn't that wild? I
Yeah.
teach drawing, sometimes painting, grad students in a research-based course, and first year thesis classes.
Yeah, that sounds
Yeah.
really satisfying in a way.
It can be. It can be. I think I am fortunate to have a lot of the things that I do surrounding art. So in that
Yeah.
regard, yes, it is. Definitely it is.
Well, tell us, describe your art and tell us what you're currently working on.
Okay, so I am primarily a drawer. That's usually how I talk about everything that I do as a drawing practice. But I'm a figure drawer. I have people come into the studio. I make drawings from observation. Sometimes I work from photographs. I also make collages, which I still consider drawings. And they range in a variety of sizes from small 9 by 12 inches to larger ones that, are 100 plus inches tall and 100 inches wide. So it really depends on the particular body of work that I'm doing. I also make in animations and some videos and occasionally dabble in sculpture and installation. And I frequently collaborate with other artists.
Yes, well, that's what I've seen some of recently. And I remember last time I met you, which is probably about a little more than a year ago, you were just taking down that installation of the house. Do you remember that house that you had?
Right. Yes. So that was in San Antonio. That a house was produced by artists in concert with artists and an organization called Art Pace. Art Pace is a residency that's been around for a long time, that was started by Linda Pace. And it's an invitational residency. You are typically curated into the residency, and the curator for my round was Dr. Jeffrey Hayes, who is the executive director at Three Walls. But I made a replica of my grandmother's house, and it's a half scale, basically a half scale model of her home, and from memory. And I was really excited about that because I wanted to talk about her in a way that symbolically represented how I remembered her house, the property that she lived on, the people that went in and out of the house, my relatives, my cousins that lived and moved throughout that house. And then also talk about the eventual development of that land by developers after her children sold, my aunts and uncles sold the property.
Yes, I think I remember now you were saying to me at the time she was one of the rare African American women to own property in Florida or probably even in the entire US, now that I think of
Well,
it.
so no, I think that I know that there's a history of Black folks owning property, as far back as we can remember, as we remember in our history. But she started purchasing land in the 40s, with her husband. And what I was talking about is the rarity of that occurrence in the 40s in the panhandle of Florida. There are people that have family property, definitely, of course, but it struck me as something unusual because of the political climate at the time, discrimination, and so I thought it's very special when someone, when a Black woman from the 40s starts acquiring tracts of land for her family, and and I think that was unusual. That was
Yeah,
unusual
definitely.
and fantastic.
Definitely. And amazing, yes. And inspiring. So
Yeah.
these memories of your grandmother, which factor into your work, what are the other concerns that are raised in addition to your grandmother?
So
Like, for example, there's a lot of nature in your work. Would you say your
yeah.
art is a celebration of that
Well,
Mother Nature, divine feminine?
so there is a lot of nature in the work. I use it as a way to describe the property that she lived on specifically, and that's where a lot of that comes from. Or I'm putting women into those kinds of spaces that might be wild, perceived as wild, like unruly landscapes, dense landscapes, and that makes a lot of sense to me, especially right now. Um, I think, when you asked me about the divine feminine and Mother Nature, I think that it's a really curious question, because I started thinking, like, well, what is all that? But if we're talking about the divine feminine as a way that we think about collaboration, and the way that we relate to each other, and caring, and kindness, etc. I think that a lot of those ideas are evoked in the work through the way that I make the work and the people that I work with to do that. It's not a direct commentary on Mother Nature, or even a direct commentary on the divine feminine, but surely
Right.
those do factor into the work's development.
Well, I think it's interesting too that, it's supposedly fashionable and trendy to have African American bodies in art right now. But you've been doing this before it was trendy. And I think that's really important that uh, people start recognizing this figure in art history, and in American art history.
Especially when it's not the Black body is not a site of ridicule, right? And
Or
so,
sexualized.
or sexualized, and yeah, that is definitely important. So I make figure drawings. I've been making these figure drawings for a long time. You're right, for a long time. It really, I wanted to see myself in work. I wanted to see myself, i.e., other Black women, represented in artwork in ways that were confounding or spoke to the kinds of histories that I was studying at the time. And I wanted to question the way that those bodies were used, those figures were used in um, work that's a part of a canon, like this sort of grand Western canon. But really, it
Yes.
was about me wanting to see myself.
Yes, well, that's a beautiful thing to start celebrating. First yourself and then outward. I'm thinking of this artist who's with Gagosian. She's primarily a painter and she paints herself as well. She's white. She lives in Italy and she paints these grotesque figures of these big women sort of squashed against glass and stuff like that. Recently, she
Mm-hmm.
had an auction record. I forget her name right now, but it'll come to me later, I guess. But
Mm-hmm.
we're seeing women's figures like that out in the market, but hopefully yours will be there soon too. I think aesthetically, it's still a challenge for the people who are buying these high-priced works to uh, have this stuff on their wall if it's not somehow lucrative. I mean, that's my
Mm-hmm.
interpretation of it,
Mm-hmm.
anyways.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I totally, I got you. Well, I think that there are the other artists that are making work with bodies like mine that are
Mm-hmm.
a part of a larger national conversation.
Mm-hmm.
I think someone like Micheline Thomas is doing the work, definitely doing the work about
Mm-hmm.
inserting Black and brown bodies into work. Um,
Mm-hmm.
artists Yeah, artists like Zandra Ibarra, who's a performance artist, is doing the exact same thing. And that artist that you're talking about, yeah, Jenny Saville is making these large
Yes,
scale
yes, yes.
figures, but it's
Mm-hmm.
also,
Mm-hmm.
and they are of white women. And so it's not unusual to see that kind of body in work. But the fact that she
Mm-hmm.
is, as a woman, making these kinds of images of that are pressed against the front of a canvas, that are pressed against a kind of social
Mm-hmm.
space is really
Mm-hmm.
important, right? And I think that
Yes.
many Black women artists are engaging, especially if they work figuratively, are engaging in very similar ideas of what it means
Mm-hmm.
to insert a brown or Black body into a social and historical space in those ways
Mm-hmm.
too. That's important.
Yeah. I mean, and also, you were talking about the body as part of your work. This rising tide of interest in sales for African American subject matter,
Hmm.
has it influenced your bottom line? I mean, Jenny Saville recently incorporated Black women into her latest body of work that was showing
Yeah.
in 20 something Street and all these masks and African imagery. So I think it's something even in the psyche. I'm not saying she's appropriating anything. I'm just saying right now that's really strong in the creative psyche,
Yeah, it
this
is.
subject matter.
It definitely is. We're always running back to Picasso, aren't we? And the Demoiselles d'Avignon. We can't help
Oh
but do
God,
that.
oh
I
God,
know,
oh
I know,
God, oh
I
God,
know,
oh God. I
I
mean,
know.
if there's one figure in art history who epitomizes the patriarchal system, I
I
think he
know.
would be and that's why he's revered by all the men. I mean, he's about as
It's so
manly as
true.
any painter could. Now we need one to balance it out on the female side. We need a woman to like be as big as Picasso, as strong as, and as
Yeah.
to just balance all that testosterone.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. And I did a series of work that takes the same title, that takes his title, where I'm putting masks, different African masks onto the bodies of Black women and white women. And there are
Mm-hmm.
other artists that have done that too, like even a contemporary artist, Makita Huja is doing it. And then
Mm-hmm.
older artists are male artists like Mel Ramos did a small series based on Picasso's painting. And so I think
Mm-hmm.
like, yeah, we can't help but comment on that. Many artists
Yeah.
can't help but do that. That's so true.
Well, a lot of your work is on paper, like you said, you're a drawer, but have you ever
Hmm.
done stuff on canvas or no?
I have, I started out as a painter. And so a lot of the
Mm-hmm.
early work that I was doing, especially when I was showing with Wendy Cooper Gallery, who is no longer and it no longer exists. But a lot of that work, um, much of that work were paintings and some drawings, but primarily paintings. And I think that even when I was painting, I was drawing. So I
Mm-hmm.
really relied on a line and gesture to
Mm-hmm.
build up those bodies. And I
Mm-hmm.
use color now in a similar way where I use it to tone or to fill in sections. So the works on canvas are doing very similar things as the work on paper.
Right.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
now where are you showing? I know you were with the gallery in DC, but then
Hmm.
I'm not sure what happened after that.
So when I uh, left the gallery in DC,
Mm-hmm.
I just started working in my studio and working with different spaces and really thinking about the context of the work that I was making.
Mm-hmm.
So a few years after that, group shows were really important to me to build a better context for the work. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm doing a few different things. So I have an upcoming project with Cultural DC at Union
Mm-hmm.
Market, and that opens
Mm-hmm.
up this Saturday. And in that show,
Mm-hmm.
I'll be debuting some sculptural work. I'm very excited
Mm-hmm.
about this. And then in March, I have a show with Steve Romalda's Gallery, which is one of the longest run galleries in Baltimore. I'm super excited
Mm-hmm.
about that, in which I will be showing all but one of my large collages. So it'll be very
Mm-hmm.
ambitious, and it'll be great to have them all in one space.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and then I have a few things coming up in the summer and in the fall, two residencies that will be happening, one in Memphis with Crosstown Arts, and then in December, I'll be at the Iris Project residency in Venice Beach, California.
So, well, this is interesting for me because I'm seeing, maybe it's just me seeing, but there are a few really good artists out there, including yourself. One of them recently, I saw she changed her Instagram page to describe herself as a independent artist. And
Mm-hmm.
she's doing the same thing as you. She has a few solo shows with galleries. She has a few group shows that she's been involved with the last few years. But she doesn't seem in a hurry to really attach herself to any one gallery. I mean, she's doing
Mm-hmm.
extremely well with her work, both critically and financially. But
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. It's interesting that there's so many artists sort of floating around, but still sort of with their feet on the ground. Really,
Yeah,
this is amazing.
it is.
It's
It's the time for this. But I will say,
mm-hmm.
I have not. My entire artistic career, professional career, has always been mediated through a gallery. Always.
Mm,
And so
mm-hmm.
it's very unusual for me to not have one or to make a decision not to have one. But with that
Mm-hmm.
said, there's been a lot of freedom. I do
Mm-hmm.
think that galleries and gallerists are extremely important. They're really important
Mm-hmm.
in this larger ecosystem of art. They,
Mm-hmm.
as in terms of who sets the tone, who sets pricing, things like that, the kind of
Mm-hmm.
commercial aspects, the business part
Mm-hmm.
of the art world, um, really is helped and mediated through a gallery system. People's
Mm-hmm.
prices remain the same or increase through galleries. And so, and if you have a really strong gallery with a strong gallerist, there's really
Mm-hmm.
not much you can't do, right? But it's the
Right.
thing is finding the right fit, right? Finding the
I
right
think
fit. And I
that's
think,
exactly it. Yeah.
right. And often people,
Mm-hmm.
settle on a gallery just to be represented. And in my
Mm-hmm.
experience, it's not the most healthy thing to do. It can be
Mm-hmm.
stifling. Um, um, but I do think that they're very valuable. But for me right now, it's really important that I don't have one,
Mm-hmm.
and it hasn't shifted the way that I'm able to move and work and show. And so for that, I'm really excited about. I have a lot of supporters that
Mm-hmm.
really believe in the work, and many of them through whom I've met through galleries and gallerists.
Yes. Recently, one of my friends moved. I don't know if she volunteered or if she was pushed out of an auction house. And basically, she has to not contact anyone that she worked with there or who she made a contact with there. I guess it's a more of a Wild West situation when you leave a gallery. It's like it's a free for all. What
It is a free
you
for
got.
all.
It's yours.
Wow, they made her, they basically, right, they made her probably sign a non-disclosure agreement and all sorts
Mm-hmm,
of other
mm-hmm.
things. And wow,
Non-compete. Yeah,
non-compete. Wow. I hope
yeah,
that there's a
yeah.
time limit on that because that doesn't seem
Yes, there is.
particularly
Thank
fair.
goodness.
Good.
Yeah,
I'm so
yeah,
glad. Yeah. But a
yeah.
lot of places do because, galleries don't want you taking their business. I get it. I get it.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
and at the same time, sometimes artists bring business to galleries and that is usually
That's
not
true.
reciprocated. That kind of expectation is not
Yeah,
reciprocated. So yeah, there
yeah,
are some conditions that that don't particularly
yeah.
sound fair. But yeah.
Yes. But what about museums? I know you've been showing in these spaces around, but have there been some museums showing interest in your work, or have you
There
shown
has.
interest in them?
Yeah, there has. I'm really excited to say that the Phillips Collection just acquired a large piece, one of the very large collages, and actually the first one. And I am extremely proud of that.
Mhm.
That they made a commitment to do that. Um,
Mhm.
Vesela Stretanovic is one of the curators at the
Mhm.
museum, and
Mhm.
and the Phillips Collection has a very traditional um, slant. It you when you go there you see the canon. They
Mhm.
have an acquisitions committee. It's called the Contemporaries Acquisitions Committee that is very active and very vital. And the
Mhm.
members go around DC and the country looking at work, new work, contemporary
Mhm.
work. And it's really exciting that Vesela and the Contemporaries have taken this on as a way to bring other kinds of work and artists into the institution. So that's
Yes.
been really exciting. And then the Arkansas Art Center a few years ago acquired
Mhm.
actually one of the first drawings in a small series titled The Demoiselles. And so I was really excited
Mhm.
about that.
Mhm.
And they have a focus on drawing. And so, yeah, so I really do love museums. The Birmingham Museum purchased a piece a
Mhm.
little bit before then. And so museums like this are really exciting, especially when they look at that, they make a commitment. They will actually show the work. They don't collect the work to put it in storage. So that's
Yes.
been really wonderful to see that. And then other people see it. And I do think that when one institution sees, another
Yeah.
institution value the work of someone, of an artist, then
Yeah.
they too will follow along. Hmm.
Yes, that is definitely how it works.
Yeah,
Well,
right.
normally I start by asking, how did you start in art? And somehow I skipped that question. But if you want to tell us a little bit of how you began, how you developed from those works on canvas onto the paper and stuff like that, that would be great.
Oh, okay. Let's see. So while I was in school, I was studying at UT Austin. I was making paintings, primarily paintings. And I went through a pretty significant medical experience where I could not actually move the work and lift the work and make this large scale work. So I was making smaller preparatory sketches for larger drawings. And after I had so many of them on my studio walls, I started to realize there was a visual language and an immediacy that was being communicated through drawing and collage that wasn't happening in the way that I was painting. And so that's how I started making these drawings. And so I did a one-to-one, translated those sketches onto either canvas or paper. And there was a kind of freshness that really excited me. And that's how I started moving through um, the particular technique that I still use to this day.
Mm-hmm.
But that's how I came to make these larger drawings. And I also
Mm-hmm.
realized that that drawing was something that I had done from a very young age, but didn't really
Mm-hmm.
come to value until I was an adult. an adult
Yeah.
studying in school. And so that was,
Yeah.
it's been pretty exciting. So I tend to think about things through the lens of drawing in a very particular way. So if the
Mhm.
collages have that feeling or that sense, for lack of a better way to
Mhm.
describe it, then I continue with the collages. If sculpture has that kind of sense, I do the same thing. So, and there's a kind of freshness or um, a communication of something, an ease of communicating some kind of idea through a particular medium that allows that 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 makes me pursue something, right? But
Right.
yeah, that's a little bit about how I started.
And what about your plans for the future? I mean, if you had one wish for your work right now, well, the direction you'd like to go in, what would that be?
Huh. So I would, that's a super hard question because the first thing I would say is that for the future, what I need is a bigger studio. And I know
Mm.
that often the size of a space can
Mhm.
dictate the things that are done. And
Mhm.
because I always envision work a certain size, a large size, a drawing of a certain size,
Mhm.
that can
Mhm.
only happen if I have the space, right? And to be able to see
Right.
things. And because I work in series. So my vision for the future is to have a bigger studio, and then everything else will follow into that. So,
Yes.
yeah. So, um, yeah. So I would love to have more, exhibitions and partnerships with other kinds of spaces, whether they're
Mhm.
artist run initiatives or institutions, museum institutions. But I'd like to see an entire body of work in one space, um, so that it has a kind of criticality or critical. Um, uh,
Mass, yes.
yeah, so that, I would like to see that.
Yeah.
But
Okay,
first, I
well, I
want a
think
bigger
for
studio.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, I don't know what the rents are like compared to like New York. I don't know. Is it like relatively inexpensive there in Baltimore
It
or?
is. It's so inexpensive in Baltimore. It's cheaper than it is in DC. It's one of the reasons why
Mhm.
I live in Baltimore and I rent in Baltimore,
Mhm.
rent a studio in Baltimore, I have my house in Baltimore. Um,
Mhm.
but it is considerably cheaper. And I have a studio right now that is pretty wonderful in Baltimore. It's a building that's owned by Trisha Kiner and David Freedom, who are both sculptors. So it's really
Mhm.
great that I'm basically surrounded by a bunch of sculptors. And it's only us three, and they live upstairs. So it's been fantastic.
Wow. I was gonna ask
Hmm.
you that next. What is the art scene like over there in Baltimore?
It's amazing. Everybody should be living
Mhm.
in Baltimore and working in Baltimore. It's funny. I often tell my students when they graduate, you should
Mhm.
just move to
Mhm.
Baltimore and be a part of the community. So there are
Right.
so many artist run initiatives and galleries
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
programs here. And it's
Mhm.
a city that if you are a working artist, you can actually work and live here. Now,
Mhm.
Baltimore doesn't have a particularly large collector base.
Mhm.
So, in terms of things like if an artist is primarily interested in commercial success, you might not
Mhm.
get that in Baltimore, but you will
Mhm.
be looked at. You will be
Mhm.
engaged by other artists and institutions at
Mhm.
the same time. So I think it's a really wonderful place to be making work.
That's interesting. You know, the last one of the artists I spoke to recently, Xavier Simmons, she was
Hmm.
also saying to her group of students, don't be in such a rush to get to the city, like stay in your community, have a great studio, be where you can afford, and the work will eventually find its way,
I
out.
agree. I agree with her
Yeah.
wholeheartedly. I think it's really
Yeah.
true. Many people think that they have to be in some kind of city center or art
Mhm.
center or whatever, wherever that is. And that
Mhm.
it's just not true. It hasn't been true
Mhm.
for about 15, 20 years. You,
Wow. Yeah.
you can make work anywhere. Because
Mhm.
we have so many ways for the work to get out, and
Right.
everybody loves the gram. Everybody loves Instagram. But, I think when you have institutions like the Crystal Bridges, who hosted the Epic exhibition program and studio visiting program, state of the art, then that is also another way, another thing that proves that you don't need to be in blank in order for the work to be seen or to be valued
I
or to be
I
exhibited.
don't know about that. Tell me about the Crystal Bridges initiative. I didn't
So,
hear about that.
Crystal Bridges a few years ago did an exhibit called State of the Art, and
Mm-hmm.
they went on an epic tour of a variety of so many U.S. based cities and towns,
Mm-hmm.
looking
Mm-hmm.
at art and looking at artists' work. They were in
Mm-hmm.
like small towns in the middle of nowhere to large cities, and what
Mm-hmm.
their
Mm-hmm.
point was, I mean, a lot of times people talked about it as the counter to the Whitney, but what they were saying
Mm-hmm.
is that great art is made everywhere. You just have to actually
Mm-hmm.
look
Mm-hmm.
for it. And sometimes the channels that we're typically used to finding artists or seeing art aren't the ones we should be
Mm-hmm.
relying upon. So, you can't just go to San Francisco or LA or New York,
Mm-hmm.
or even
Mm-hmm.
Chicago to see the art. You have
Right.
to
Right.
go to the places that are off the beaten path. And so State of the Art was really it was just an amazing um, tour and
Yeah, I
exhibition.
totally agree with that.
Yeah, it
And
was
Crystal Bridges
phenomenal.
is basically they're the Walton family, basically.
Yeah, they are. Right, they are. Yeah.
So thanks to what's that store called again? Walmart. Thanks to Walmart,
Walmart. Thanks to
we have
Walmart. You have Walmart and then you've got Crystal
yeah,
Bridges. So everything in between
exactly.
seems to be covered. Like,
Yep, pretty much, pretty much. That's
oh my
America at its
gosh.
best.
There you go. That's
Anyway,
right.
well, let's see what happens with Walmart now that China is on lockdown. I mean, a lot of stuff
Right?
comes in from China to there, I imagine.
I know it does. I know it
Oh,
does. I know.
n-
Mm.
yeah. Well, thank you for joining me today. I mean, we are pretty much done, I think, with the questions that I had. But if you have anything else you want to add, feel free to add it now.
I'm just really excited to be able to talk with you about some of the things that I'm doing. I
Mm-hmm.
also want to say I belong to a couple of boards that I think are really important and really shifting the way that artists are engaged through institutions. And
Mm-hmm.
one is the Washington Project for the Arts, who a few years
Mm-hmm.
ago we made a shift in our programming and approach under the direction of Peter Nesbitt, who is our executive director, where artists are bringing programming to the institution through the WPA, and that all
Mm-hmm.
programming is generated by artists, solely by artists. And it's been reflected in the kinds of support that we're getting from larger granting institutions. And so it's been really wonderful. And so I would love for people to pay attention to what the WPA is doing. And then
Mm-hmm.
also the Maryland State Arts Council is doing some pretty significant work um, under the leadership of Ken Skurses. And he is really thinking about equity and inclusion in a way from the ground up, so that even the language that the Arts Council, the Maryland State Arts Council, uses and adopts
Mm-hmm.
forwards our belief in equity and inclusion. So I think that these are two organizations that I feel very strongly about, that mirror my own ethics and values in my studio and in my practice. And
Right.
so I'm really proud to be a part of those two.
That's good to know.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, well, I'll talk to you once we get offline too, and I have had some ideas just speaking to you right now, but I'll save that for when we get off. So I'll say bye now, and
Yay.
we'll talk
Thank
soon.
you. Thanks.
Okay,
Thanks,
take
Miko.
care. Yeah,
Bye.
have a great day. Bye. Thank you for joining us for another episode of the Bees and Honey podcast. Next week, we're going to do something a little different. We'll be speaking to a collector and what would probably be called one of the original influencers in the art market in America, Mr. Stefan Simchowitz. I'm a big fan of his. I'm not sure who else is, but he has always interesting things to say. So join us next week on the Bees and Honey podcast. Thank you.